Death and suffering is everywhere.
How can an all-powerful, loving God allow suffering? This week on Creation Magazine Live.
Welcome to Creation Magazine Live. My name is Richard Fangrad.
And I'm Calvin Smith.
Now this week on Creation Magazine Live, our topic is how can a good God allow evil in the world?
Wow, talk about a huge subject.
It is.
But it's one that we often hear questions about and that many Christians struggle with as well.
Yep.
And not only will we give a biblical response to the question today, but we'll also show how the proper response relates directly to the creation-evolution debate.
Yeah. The origin of death and suffering is vitally important in defending Christianity. And many people use the present suffering and death that you see everywhere as an excuse not to believe in God. So it's vital to have an answer. Such a justification of God's goodness in the face of evil is known in biblical terminology as theodicy.
Right. Now, the big picture is that Adam's sin is the reason for all the death in the world. A consistent biblical answer points out that death is an intruder. So it's not part of God's original creation, but is ultimately due to man's sin.
Right. However, according to theology that accommodates long ages, death has always been with us. And theistic evolution even says that God used this, what does the Bible call it? The last enemy, death is the last enemy, as a means of producing his very good creation.
Yeah, not a really wise response.
No.
You know, it was over a decade ago now that terrorists in the U.S., murdered 3,000 people. Of course, we see more of this all the time. And, that it wasn't even close to the worst mass murder by evil men or movements that we've seen. The evolution-based Nazi regime wiped out 6 million Jews and many others. And these morally evil deeds, many to question why a loving God would allow such evil acts.
Right. Of course, there's also suffering caused by natural evils, like a magnitude 7 earthquake that devastated Haiti back on the 12th of January back in 2010, killing at least 220,000 people. Or the March 2011 magnitude 9 earthquake in Japan that was 1,000 times stronger. And the magnitude 9.3 earthquake west of Indonesia on the 26th of December 2004, and that produced that devastating tsunami that killed over 230,000 people in 14 countries.
Right,
Crazy.
And even those tragedies actually pale in comparison when you look at some of the other natural evils. For example, in a few years in the mid-14th century, the Black Death, the bubonic plague, painfully wiped out an estimated 75 to 200 million people in Europe, or a huge percent of the population. In quite recent times, the First World War, with 9 million people killed, it was followed by the even more devastating Spanish flu epidemic, which killed at least 50 million of the world's population, many of them young, healthy adults.
Yeah, and another type of natural evil is physical disability or handicap. We can think of Helen Keller, for example, who lost senses both of hearing and of sight when she was a baby. Johnny Erickson Tada, who was paralyzed from the neck down when she was a teenager. Those are evil things.
In addition to these headline events, just think of each of us, right? We suffer illness, we suffer headaches, accidents, and eventually death. So it's not surprising when the burdens become too great that people cry out to God, why don't you do anything? Why don't you care?
Yeah, and as the shock of each traumatic event subsides for a while, people begin asking such things, why such things occur. Reading about past wars or visiting memorials, for example, like the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and inevitably raises questions, how can there be a loving God controlling the universe in light of such suffering and death?
That's right. The pervasiveness of evil and death and things like that it's possibly the most effective tool that atheists use to attack the Bible's picture of a loving God. So atheists make what appear to be a reasonable complaint. If God is loving and all-powerful, then why doesn't he use his power to stop the evil, suffering, and pain and death in the world? And multitudes have rejected God because of suffering.
Yeah. Now, as you can see, this is an incredibly important topic. And sadly, most people and many Christians have no ready answer to the question of death and suffering in the world. Over the next few minutes, we'll dig deep into God's Word for answers, and we'll start that when we get back.
Most people have heard about the meteorite that hit the Earth and supposedly caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. Secular geologists refer to this as the KT extinction, and they regard it as one of the most significant mass extinctions, according to their deep time view of Earth history. However, did you know that the secular geologists have identified 7 other mass extinctions in the portion of the geological record that contains complex plant and animal life? This shows that scientists are increasingly recognizing the catastrophic nature of the geological record. This goes against old ideas of only slow and gradual processes being responsible for all the rocks and fossils. These new perspectives are much more in line with a biblical view of Earth history, whereby Noah's flood wiped out all air-breathing land animals not on the ark. No, there were not 8 mass extinctions in Earth history, but there certainly was one massive extinction event.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
Okay, if you just tuned in this week, we're talking about how can an all-powerful, loving God allow suffering? And we've seen that many people have used this question to reject God entirely and become atheists.
Okay, so let's start, talk about death in general. Darwin's bulldog, T.H. Huxley, once said, if our hearing were sufficiently acute to catch every note of pain, we would be deafened by one continuous scream. Of course, his argument's pretty clear here.
Yeah.
A good God wouldn't allow such evil.
Right, but do atheists really have a case? For atheists to complain about evil, they must provide a standard of good and evil within their own worldview. If we are simply evolved pond scum, as a consistent atheist believes, where can we find an objective standard for right and wrong?
Right. I mean, Richard Dawkins once said, the universe we observe has no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music.
Yeah, but our ideas of right and wrong under this system are merely artifacts of some chemical process that occurs in the brain which happen to confer some survival advantage on our alleged ape-like ancestors.
Right, but the motions in Hitler's brain obeyed the same chemical laws as those in Mother Teresa's.
That's right.
So on what ground are the latter's actions better than the former's? Also, why should these terrorist attacks slaying thousands of people in New York be more terrible than a frog killing thousands of flies? In an atheist worldview, there's no objective standard of truth, no absolute right, no absolute wrong, and Dawkins has admitted it. So, what's right for you might not be right for me, and et cetera, and then it just breaks down.
Right, but a Christian knows that there is an objective standard for morality that transcends individual humans, because it was given by an objective and transcendent moral lawgiver who is the Creator, of course. An atheist's argument against God because of objective evil inadvertently concedes the very point that they're trying to argue against.
That's right.
To say something is good or evil is to say that there must be an absolute standard by which to judge such things, by which to differentiate between things that are good and evil.
Right, and we should note that the argument isn't that atheists can't live good lives,
right? That's
just
not what we're saying.
They don't have an objective basis for their goodness, so if we're just rearranged pond scum.
Right, so here is the atheistic argument summarized. It goes back to basically the pagan Greek philosopher Epicurus, who lived from 341 to 270 BC, who was cited by the early Christian apologist Lactantius, and who lived from about 8240 to 320. Then used by the Scottish Enlightenment skeptic David Hume, very famous, who lived in the 1700s. In schematic form, the argument could be written this way. Point 1, if God exists, then God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and morally perfect.
Point number 2, if God is all-powerful, then he has the power to eliminate all evil.
Point number 3, if God is all-knowing, then he knows when evil exists.
Point number 4, if God is morally perfect, then he has the desire to eliminate all evil.
Number 5, evil exists.
Number 6, if evil exists and God exists, then either God doesn't have the power to eliminate all evil, or doesn't know when evil exists, or doesn't have the desire to eliminate all evil.
Number 7, therefore God doesn't exist.
Right, now, the first premise describes the Judeo-Christian God as revealed in the Bible, all-knowing, all-powerful, etc. So premises 2 to 4 are plausibly held to be what the Judeo-Christian God would do with such attributes. Now, the first two are held to be the Judeo-Christian premises, while 5 is indisputable, although only truly justifiable under a Judeo-Christian worldview. So anti-theists draw the conclusion that God can't have the attributes that the Bible reveals about him, number 6, and conclude that such a God doesn't exist, which is number 7.
Right, but some theistic philosophers try to retreat on number 1 by denying that God is all-powerful. And you see that in things like open theism, which is one of the, I think, dumbest heresies to come along in a long time, and process theology. But this is not true of the God of the Bible.
Right.
So how then do we explain this? Tune in just a minute, and we'll give you some answers.
The Genesis account is the Rolls-Royce of creation books. It's a thorough verse-by-verse analysis of the first 11 chapters of Genesis, revealing what the text means. Unlike most commentaries, it includes the additional step of providing cutting-edge scientific support for the history recorded in Genesis, because its author, Dr. Jonathan Sarfati, is a PhD scientist. Since science confirms the truths in God's Word, if both are properly interpreted, this nearly 800-page book makes a fantastic reference tool for pastors or anyone wanting to know what Genesis really means. Order your copy at creation.com.
Well, in this week's episode, we're talking about how can a good God allow evil in the world, a very important question for Christians to answer. And we've detailed an atheistic argument regarding evil and God's existence, which we're going to restate here because it's important for us to keep track of. So here we go. Here's their argument. Number 1, if God exists, then God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and morally perfect. 2, if God is all-powerful, then he has the power to eliminate all evil. Point 3, if God is all-knowing, then he knows when evil exists. 4, if God is morally perfect, then he has the desire to eliminate all evil. 5, evil exists. 6, if evil exists and God exists, then either God doesn't have the power to eliminate all evil, or doesn't know when evil exists, or doesn't have the desire to eliminate all evil. 7, the conclusion, therefore, God doesn't exist.
Okay, right. Now, we've discussed how points 1 to 3 and 5 to 7 are sound, and that even number 4 is sound but incomplete. As Christian philosophers have long argued, premises 4 should be extended to, if God is morally perfect, then he has the desire to eliminate all evil, unless he has a good reason for allowing it. Then there's no incompatibility with number 5.
Right. And yes, and since no anti-theist can know and show that there's no possible good reason for God allowing evil,
right,
since that'd be a universal negative, the argument collapses as logical disproof of theism. And this was expressed in a wonderful book by Dr. A.E. Wilder Smith when he said, "This is how God triumphs over evil, not by stopping it, but by using it to his greater glory." Later on, we're going to actually see some biblical reasons why God is permitting suffering.
Okay. Yes, and apologists have also long pointed out that the atheist argument doesn't work for another reason. The existence of evil now would be incompatible with number 4 only if it read, if God is morally perfect, then he has the desire to eliminate all evil immediately.
Yeah, that's a really important point, because if God was to get rid of all evil immediately, he would need to destroy all of us. And with this understanding, we can correct number 5 to read this. 5, evil exists for now, but will one day be destroyed, as the Bible says, or God has not got rid of evil yet. There's another way to put it.
Okay, now this by itself is enough to show that not only do atheists not have a way of defining good and evil anyway, but that atheists lack a logical case against God using this argument.
Right. So, I mean, that's good, but it's still important for us to have a good apologetic explanation to go further and explain where evil came from, why God allowed it, and what he's doing about it, and has actually already done about it.
Yes. Yeah. Now, the Bible clearly states that when God created moral beings, there was no actual evil. In fact, evil is not a thing in itself, even though it's real. Evil, rather, is the lack of some good that something ought to have. For example, a wound can't exist without a body.
Right.
And the very idea of being wounded presupposes the concept of a healthy body.
Right. Things have to be in context. I mean, blindness in humans, that's a physical evil because humans are supposed to see.
Be able to see, yeah.
But oysters aren't. They're not supposed to see, so blindness isn't an evil for them. So it's a lack of something, right? Also, evil actions are done to achieve things like wealth, power, sexual gratification, and which the evildoer finds pleasing, but they aren't necessarily, good. So since evil isn't a thing, God didn't create evil.
Right. And this lack of evil extended to the animal kingdom. In particular, people and animals originally ate plants. Not other animals, as it says in Romans 1:29 and 30. There was no violence or painful suffering in the original very good world.
Right, that was Genesis 1:29 and 30, by the way, just so
Genesis,
if you're following along.
Yes, what did I say?
You said Romans.
Romans, that would be Genesis, yeah.
Yes, now there's a biblical illustration in Isaiah 11, 6-9, and 65:25, which are pictures of a future with allusions to the Edenic paradise God originally created. These are famous passages, of course, about a lion and a calf and a wolf and a lamb and a vegetarian lion and a non-harmful viper, a snake, right?
Yeah, and significantly, both passages close with indicators that this reflects a more ideal world, and that the current world does not, they shall not hurt or destroy, they shall do no evil or no harm. These indicate that hurting, harming, and destroying animal life wouldn't have been a part of the original very good creation.
And this is again where long ages, trying to mix in evolution, trying to mix in millions of years of death and suffering before Adam sinned, it just doesn't make sense theologically. Trying to blend those things together, it just doesn't work. So why would God have created, with things killing each other in the first place? I mean, we can't even explain sin when you try to add millions of years and evolution and all this type of thing. And this is a point that our speakers make, of course, over and over again.
Yes.
There was no death before Adam sinned. It was a very good world, no sin, no death, no corruption. More when we get back.
Several years ago, the paleontological world heralded the discovery of a fossil called Tiktaalik rosei. Some scientists claimed it as a perfect missing link between fish and amphibians, and so it started appearing in school and university textbooks. However, the discovery of a series of footprints in Poland made by a four-legged animal has changed everything. That's because these footprints were dated according to the same evolutionary ideas at 18 million years older than Tiktaalik. Therefore, from an evolutionary perspective, if four-legged animals existed before Tiktaalik, then Tiktaalik cannot be the transition between fish and four-legged animals that it was claimed to be. Indeed, these footprints are so significant that they have prompted some scientists to say, "We thought we'd pinned down the origin of limbed tetrapods. We have to rethink the whole thing." Isn't it amazing how just a little bit of new evidence can completely undermine a neat evolutionary story?
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
Well, we're back, and our subject this week is how can an all-powerful, loving God allow suffering? So, okay, we've shown that God didn't create evil, but it is here now, so what happened?
Yeah, okay. Well, God created both Adam and Eve, as well as the angels, with the power of contrary choice. This means that they had the power to make a choice contrary to their own nature. Even God doesn't have this power. He can't sin because that goes against his perfectly holy nature.
That's right. It's an attribute of God that he can't sin.
Right, yeah.
So now the power of contrary choice itself wasn't evil, but it meant that there was the possibility of evil. And evidently God saw that the greater good would come from it, that the result would be creatures who genuinely love God freely. And actually, real love must be free. I mean, if I program my computer to flash I love you on the screen, it wouldn't exactly be genuine love, would it? No.
But Adam's misuse of this choice resulted in actual evil befalling him and the rest of the material creation over which he had dominion, of course.
Right. Now, a short time after creation week, Eve was deceived by the serpent's temptation and in turn gave the forbidden fruit to Adam, who wasn't deceived but still ate it. And we actually see this statement in the New Testament in 1 Timothy 2:13 and 14.
Yes, and as a result of his sin, Adam and his descendants acquired a sin nature. We read about that in Romans 5:12. He lost the power of contrary choice. It now meant that they could no longer go against their sin nature. And you see that explained, of course, in Romans 7, 15 to 25 and other places. People today don't get their sin natures by sinning. They sin because they have a sin nature. That's how it works.
Now, in the eternal state of redeemed humanity, having been purified by Christ, we'll no longer even have the potential for sin. So that the new heavens and the new earth will actually even be better than Eden was.
Yeah, that'll be great. So in summary, following Augustine, Adam and Eve were created with the ability not to sin. And after the fall, humans had no ability not to sin. In the eternal state, humans will have no ability to sin. There's the progression.
Now, what about the so-called free will defense? Sometimes Christian apologists invoke something similar to what we've been mentioning here, a sort of complete free will defense to kind of save the problem of evil here.
Okay, yes, but the biblical account is more nuanced. Any freedom applied only to Adam and Eve. Their sin lost the true freedom they were created with. Their descendants, that's all of us, are now in bondage to sin. Only redeemed humanity in the eternal state will have the true freedom from this bondage.
Okay, well that's a pretty good overview to explain moral evil in the world where people cause bad things to happen. But what about natural evil? What about when someone's taking a walk and a branch falls off and kills them or hurts them? Or what about tornadoes or earthquakes?
Right. The free will defense is fine in the face of moral evil, but seems less direct with regard to these kinds of natural evils. But the Bible tells us that Adam was the head of the human race. In Genesis 1:26 and 28 to 28, it says that mankind was given dominion over creation. So when he sinned, the whole creation under him was cursed as well.
Right, and since God is the author of life, death is the natural penalty of life without God, the giver of life. And also because the Lord is holy and just, there has to be a penalty for rebellion.
Right, yeah. The fall was cosmic in scope. As Romans 8:22 says, the whole creation groans and labors with birth pains.
Right, Adam and Eve couldn't have been separated from God, be fallen, and still live in a paradise without consequences. Everything's running down because of sin.
Right.
God has given us a taste of life without Him, a world full of violence and death and suffering and disease. So in summary, God's allowing us to experience what we wanted, life without God. And we'll be back.
Creation Ministries International edifies the body of Christ by providing more than 30 years of Bible-supporting scientific research, delivered through speaking engagements, books, magazines, and a variety of media, much of which is archived on our website, creation.com. Did you know that if you read 3 articles on creation.com each day, it would take over 7 years to read them all? Such a wealth of information didn't arise by chance, however. We do this through the faithful prayers and gifts of our supporters, which also fund ongoing research. Support the building up of the church by partnering with CMI. Donate today at creation.com/donate.
All right, welcome back. This is our In the News section where we highlight something to do with the creation-evolution debate in the popular news. So what do we have?
Well, here's one called "Cockroaches Use Their Own Internal GPS to Get Around." So we'll read certain sections here. There's always something about the creation-evolution debate in the news. Yep. I like to scan the news articles all the time. Well, anyway, this one starts, "When navigating your kitchen, cockroaches likely don't need to stop for directions.
Oh my.
Turns out the pesky insects have an internal GPS." Yeah.
To uncover, as the article continues, to uncover this internal GPS, the researchers put cockroaches through the same experiments that have been used to uncover the navigational brain cell activity in rats.
Right. So placed on a rotating platform, the insects were encircled by a black wall with a single removable landmark, a white square. The cockroaches were then rotated 360 degrees a number of times in 30-degree increments, both clockwise and counterclockwise.
Yeah, poor dizzy little guys.
Yep.
And for instance, imagine walking toward a door when the door is there compared to when it used to be there, but someone removed it. It's easier to precisely encode direction when there is some kind of a reference point we can compare our heading to. Lead study author Adrian Varga, a doctoral student at Case Western Reserve University, told Live Science in an email. Same with cockroaches, apparently, Varga said.
And it continues. Cell activity peaked when the white card was inserted in the wall, indicating that the roach's head angled towards the visual reference. Without the white card, activity in the same brain cells indicated that the roaches knew their orientation despite its absence.
Tests also included placing a foil cover over the heads of cockroaches to block any visual cues. Brain activity in the blind cockroaches indicated that some brain cells do not need visual cues. When the foil was removed, the cell activity reflected the roaches' heads shifting toward the visual reference point. This suggests that their internal GPS was remapping to include the new visual information, according to researchers.
Wow. So cockroaches have GPS systems. Isn't that cool? I mean, the U.S. Department of Defense developed the GPS system we use and got it fully operational in about 1995, and it originally used 24 satellites. Yeah. I mean, I wonder if that took any intelligence to create.
A little bit, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but you look at the quote from the article as to where, this GPS system came from, and they say this: the mechanism is likely an example of convergent evolution. There we are again.
Evolution can do anything.
Yep.
It's amazing.
When distinct animals develop similar systems independently to manage the same problems, because as you read the rest of the article, they talk about how a number of animals actually have the ability, like this GPS type programming.
Yep.
Actually, Dr. Jonathan Sarfati from our U.S. office now, he's in the United States, wrote a book called By Design, and in that book he lists several creatures that do this. The theory of evolution is so instilled into the consciousness of people today that, I mean, this is just a popular level article. I'm sure there were millions of people around the world that, probably checked out this. And does it ever even occur to them? Like, you've got a little bug, his brain's this big, it's got a GPS system. Yeah. And that's just supposed to have evolved through
random processes over millions of years that just happened to be there.
Exactly.
It's amazing. And creation is an inferior explanation for that?
Right.
It's amazing. Because creation isn't even mentioned in the article, of course, right? As is normally the case with these new scientific discoveries. Right. The option that maybe there is another explanation that could account for these GPS ability in the cockroach's brain there.
Yeah, it's never even mentioned.
Never even mentioned. So evolution must have done it.
Yeah, it's no wonder people only come to that conclusion if that's the only thing they ever get talked about.
It's amazing. So yeah, but in Creation Magazine, you'll read about these kinds of amazing scientific discoveries, but we don't censor out the biblical response. We'll tell you what the evolutionists have said, and in a lot of cases we're commenting in the magazine on articles like this, right. And then we give a much superior explanation from the Bible. The Bible's history just makes much more sense of the science. Mm-hmm. Come on back next week. We're talking about the Lost Squadron. If you don't know what that is, you'll have to tune in next week.
That's right.
See you then.
See you then.